Welcome to the program From Darkness to Light, right here on ITV with me, Bina Mahiz. Thank you so much for joining us today. And today on Stats with Me, I have Dr. Kirk Meighoo, and Dr. Meighoo is a former lecturer at the University of Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica as well. He also has the unique honor of being the only West Indian to have launched a book in the UK House of Commons in Westminster. And he's the author of Politics in a Half-Made Society, Trinidad and Tobago, 1925 to 2001, and co-author of Democracy and Constitutional Reform in Trinidad and Tobago with Court of Appeal Justice Peter Jamada. Welcome, Dr. Meighoo. Thank you so much for being on Stats with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I'm saying that you authored several books and you've been actively involved in politics.
Mm-hmm.
Why the decision of politics and books? What made you choose those two fields?
I guess I was always inspired by, I was inspired by writers, thinkers, activists, and these sorts of people like that, you know. And I mean, an early influence of mine was CLR James. I mean, I just loved everything that CLR James did, you know, and everything he wrote, and you know, his travels all over the world, and his involvement in African. You know, he was kind of a model for me, I guess. Now that you know, I'm thinking about it, because he was an intellectual. He used to write books, right, like.
Right.
The Black Jacobins and Beyond the Boundary and World Revolution and all sorts of things. And I mean, just an amazing visionary mind. And I mean, he would be speaking in the UK. He would be speaking in America. He you know, I can't remember. I don't think he ever. He may have gone to Africa. I'm not sure, but he certainly had. Lots of contacts with African leaders in London,
Right.
you know, and he was certainly well known by, you know, people like Kwame Nkrumah and so forth, and people throughout Africa, you know, would be reading his books as well, throughout America, throughout Britain, throughout the Caribbean, and I found him very inspirational, you know. In fact, I would just say. Every single West Indian intellectual, definitely in Trinidad, maybe not West Indian, let Trinidad then, right? Every single one can trace their intellectual genealogy back to CLR James, one way or the other, whether it be Naipaul, Lloyd, Eric Williams, everybody goes back to CLR James, right? He is really, you know, and he's really such an important thinker, and he was a great inspiration to me. And then later on, you know, and I suppose, and I always liked those kinds of people, you know, and you know, Malcolm X was a big influence on me.
Right.
In fact, I'll tell you, I mean, it's a lot of the black nationalist struggle actually inspired me. Before even I sort of got into, you know, some of the say Indian nationalist thinkers and things like that, you know. I mean, a lot of it was that inspired me, and then later Naipaul sort of became very important to me, very very important to me, especially as I was doing my PhD and stuff like that. And I mean, he sort of had a huge, tremendous impact in finally shaping my ultimate thing. But then people like Lloyd, you know, I've been very fortunate. Not only to, you know, I mean, I worked with Lloyd very closely for a number of years. I don't know if you know that, you're kind of young, but you know, in the 90s and 2000s, I was very close to Lloyd, and you know, he was a great inspiration as well. And you know, Eric Williams as well.
Yeah.
For all my criticism of Eric Williams, as what he did as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, but as a man and as a thinker. I have great admiration and respect for him. In fact, my PhD supervisor worked with Eric Williams in terms of putting together the book Forward from the Love of Liberty. That's Dr. Paul Sutton. And I mean, so when I was doing my PhD, because Eric Williams had given Paul Sutton all of his speeches he ever did, from opening a library in Point Fortin to, to announcing Point Lisa, or whatever, or the famous 5 speeches he gave in 1955, 56 before the formation of the PNM and in Woodford Square. So, and I had all those speeches with me while I was doing my PhD on the history of Trinidad and Tobago, and I guess I was that whole idea of I guess changing the world for the better, seeing injustice in the world, just never ever, being right with it. I suppose some of it comes from a spiritual thing too. I mean, my father was Catholic, my mother was Hindu, and I actually grew up as a Catholic, although I didn't remain a Catholic, but. That's another story. But I have tremendous respect for the Catholic Church still, though. And it had an undoubted formation on me, because in the 1980s there was something called Liberation Theology. That was, 70s and 80s was very important, right? And that influenced me a lot, right? In terms of, the whole idea was that, if Jesus was around today, would he just be in church praying, or what would he be doing? Right? He'd be revolutionary, right? In the 80s, that was the idea. And so, I mean, I saw the whole world sort of differently when that was opened up to me, right? And then I started to see things I never saw before, and I started to learn about things. I was learning about apartheid and the nuclear arms race, and all these kind of big issues. And as a 15, 16-year-old or whatever, for the first time, coming to grips with it, I was inspired. So and then then later on, coming across the CLR James and the V.S. Naipauls and the Lloyd Bests and the Malcolm X's and all these people that just inspired me, and I just wanted to be like them, I suppose.
I actually saw that you made a reference to V.S. Naipaul in your book Democracy and Constitutional Reform in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, I always refer to Naipaul. I think he is, I've written about this before. Him, Eric Williams, and Lloyd Best are almost like the same person intellectually.
Yeah.
But they're coming at the same problem of Trinidad, from slightly different angles, with different solutions, with different personalities, and different solutions. Because Trinidad fundamentally is a problem, right? It is a problem.
Okay.
There's something great about it and something absolutely vexing about it, right? At the same time.
It is.
Right? There's something so amazing about this place and something so horrifying about this place, all at the same time. And any honest intellectual always knows that, right? And you see it in Naipaul's work all over. You see it in Williams' work all over. You see it in Lloyd Best's work all over, right? They love the place and they hate the place.
It's like an oxymoron.
Yeah, but it's the complexity of the thing, and everybody has to come to terms with it in different ways, right? And the way when I talk about Williams, Naipaul, Lloyd Best, I mean, I think that Naipaul, his thing was flight. He had to leave, although everything he writes about is always in Trinidad. He could be in Malaysia, he could be in Iran, and he will say, but this tree, I remember when I was a boy growing up in Chaguanas, my neighbor had this. And he will always, at his Nobel speech, he talks about the Chaguanas main road. I mean, everything, he's always seeing the world through Trinidad. And he may be brutally honest about it, because Williams and Lloyd Best admire Naipaul greatly. I mean, they all admire each other,
right?
Because it was Eric Williams that invited Naipaul here to do the Middle Passage in '61 and to write up all those things. And Lloyd was a great admirer of Naipaul. He's a great critic of Eric Williams, but I think that you know, that sort of hatred was because they were so similar in so many ways, you know.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah.
So I saw that you had the unique honor of being the only West Indian to have launched a book in the UK House of Commons in Westminster. Can you tell us about that journey?
Yeah, that was quite an amazing thing. It was actually the British High Commissioner had been a fan of mine, I suppose, and there was an MP. You know, so he would invite me to his place a lot. When I had my weekly columns in the Express and Guardian and so forth, you know, there was a whenever the, you know, dignitaries and MPs and whatever would come, you know, he would invite me over and so forth, and you know, out of the discussion, one MP said that, you know, they would really like me to launch when they learned that I was putting all this stuff together, the book on the history of Trinidad and Tobago.
Right.
Then they said, well, you know, I'd really like you to launch it in the House of Commons. How would you like that? And I said, that would be great.
Wasn't this a dream come true?
I suppose so. I can't say so because I never dreamt of it. It's not something I want. It's not something I think, oh, I want to launch my book in the house. It's not something I ever tried to get, you understand? I mean, I've always tried to spread my ideas widely. I've always, you know, tried to engage people with my ideas at every level, right? So yes, I would like, you know, but you know, it's not that particular place or honor I tried for, you know. So it came and I was, you know, very pleased about that.
And how many books have you written?
In books, it's just the two I've written, but there's been many sort of articles, you know, columns. But in terms of books that have been written too, but I have about 3 or 4 in manuscript form or in my head already planned out to do. But honestly, in the Trinidad and Tobago environment, being an author is a very limiting thing. People don't read in Trinidad.
They don't.
No, they don't. I mean, I remember LeRoy Clarke had told me when I first launched my book, Politics and a Half Meters Out, he said, there are only 250 readers in Trinidad, right? When there basically 250 people will buy your book.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you do a print run, print 250, and those will be sold. Then the other, you know, up to 500, you can go up to 1,000. You know, you might have to fight up with that. But basically that is. So people, we don't have a publishing industry. What we have is self-publishing, right? So I mean, my books are published in Oxford, in Princeton, and in Kingston, Jamaica. Right? But in Trinidad, the way the global publishing industry works, right? Things are changing now with the internet and all this kind of stuff. But the way it worked for most of the 20th century, well, before the 20th century, up to the internet, let's say that, you have a publishing house. They, you know, so you submit a manuscript, and then they look at it, and then they agree whether you will be an author on their list or not. Then they send it out to reviewers. They will give it to you to do any changes or queries, and then they publish it and they distribute it, and they send you on a book tour or whatever, and then you get royalties.
Wow.
In Trinidad, somebody has a book, they have a piece of paper, they go to a printer, and they print it up. There's no editing, there's no peer review. And I'm telling you, even our academics do this in Trinidad. It's shameful. I have to be honest, it's shameful. But that's what they do, our biggest academics even, right? And I've always had that standard where I've always wanted my work to be peer reviewed. I've always wanted to be published in international journals so it could stand up with anything that's produced by anybody in the world, right? That it has passed the same criteria as anybody else, as the highest quality, you know, things coming out of Britain and the UK. And So when you look in the academic databases and stuff, and and you look at politics in Trinidad and Tobago, you're basically going to find me, because the people in Trinidad aren't doing it, and this is a laziness that is part of Trinidad and Tobago culture.
Right.
It is a laziness because you could get away with it here. So why put in the extra effort? They're not going to read it anyway. Because all you want is a little something here. You're not thinking globally. And I guess this goes back to the CLR James kind of thing.
Right.
There was the people like CLR James, people like V.S. Naipaul. They thought the world was their stage, right? And I always sort of, those have been my models, that we as Trinidadians and Tobagonians, we can engage the whole world from here, We can. We are, we produce great minds, great art, great, many, many great things out of here that can stand next to anything and anybody in the world. But we need to put the quality, we need to, put the work into it, the discipline and the quality. You can't just try a thing.
Right. But do you think it's a lack of discipline?
Yeah. There is definitely a lack of discipline. I mean that's the whole thing. That's what Trini time is all about.
I mean, the thing is with Trinidad and Tobago, like you mentioned before, only 250 persons may have read a book.
Yeah.
And I know Trinidad has been
but
heavy.
I must say, I'm glad I had a good
I understand.
1250, right? So
Are very heavy on oral traditions and oral culture.
Yes.
So I know there was a point in time where that took center stage.
Yeah.
So a lot of us, or a lot of the older folks and young at heart folks, they would prefer to sit around a fireside or just sit on their liming and have their stories told and tell their stories as opposed to reading.
Yeah, and that's great too, right? That's
but oral tradition, oral culture, that too is going.
Yeah, it is, definitely. It is, I mean, after Paul Keynes Douglas is who? Right?
Exactly. I mean, there was Ricky Tikki.
Yeah.
There were these characters or these persons who got into character. And I think, honestly, that is what is missing now with the younger persons.
I mean, one of the tragedies of our colonial heritage in Trinidad and Tobago is that we lack a self-confidence. We don't document and save our own tradition and history because we don't think it's good enough. Honestly, deep down inside, most Trinis don't think it's good enough, right? And so they will take something, from abroad or somewhere and use that all the time, right? Because it is a profound inferiority complex, right? And that is part of our colonial heritage, right? These are not our ancestral homes. Right? Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, my family's here 6th generation, so it's ancestral in that sense, but let's say we're talking about, millennia, right? Thousands of years. This is not our thousands of, our millennial home, right? So there's that kind of thing. So we're not as rooted in this, for thousands of years, as our ancestors would be rooted in India, or other ancestors would be rooted in Europe, or Africa, or China, or whatever, where they'll be there for thousands. So we kind of don't have that presence here in that sense. So I think that is part of it. But the colonial thing obviously is there too, right? So everything we learned about was, how great, Britain was, and the Western world, and I suppose the English language, and all that sort of thing. And so we just think that's the best, and we don't value enough of our own things.
Well, in terms of valuing that, I think too that it's we don't accept our own culture, and we're in the mindset of always adopting something else because we see it as bigger, we see it as brighter, we see it as shinier, sparkly.
Yeah.
We don't. So I mean,
but it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? Because most of Trinidadians experience a product they see on TV, right? And that's not reality, right? So they look at TV and think, oh, well, all Americans live like they do on Friends.
Right.
Or whatever show is popular
Right.
now. Like that's an old
Right.
show. I'm dating myself.
Right.
But whatever is popular today, I don't watch TV. But so and they think, well, what they see on TV is real life, but or what they see MTV Cribs or whatever, right? That is not real life. That is some pretend thing, right? When you go there and you see what it's like, it's certainly nowhere near as glamorous as it's made out to be on TV. TV is not supposed to be reality. TV is entertainment, but we get confused that is actually what reality is up there, and we wish our life could be like that. I mean, to a certain extent, it happens to people up there. People think that they wish they could live the life they see on TV. I guess
Caribbean
everybody does.
life.
Yeah. So we have that, and we don't, and we lack the self-confidence. We do lack the self-confidence, and that's something that we need to develop. Yeah.
But do you think that, is there any way to salvage what we once had, or what we have, or what we could potentially have?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and to develop it. Yeah. Certainly, there's a lot of archival material, because at the same time, as I'm making this broad statement that we don't archive our history, there's always a minority that does, and has done for a long time. So someone like Dr. Kumar Mahabir that you've mentioned,
Right.
he's been documenting this for decades. People like Banyan, Christopher Laird, and who I think Dr. Kumar worked with before. They've documented things on film for so long. You even have things like there's certain periods in our history in the government where things like TTT has some great archives. Their
Right.
historical archives. There are all these books and newspapers and writers who may not be popular in the mainstream, and most people forget and they don't know. But we have the Michael Anthonys, we have the books by Du Boisier and by Gomes, and we do have these things. They are printed, they are stored, they are kept. You could find them in the archives, whether at the UE Library or whether at Nallis Library. They are there. They can be picked up, dusted off, revived. They can be, and in fact, this has happened throughout history. Like whenever, say, a culture is renewing itself, you'll find there's a movement going back and digging up all the stuff that these lonely people who were putting this together, and everybody's laughing at them and calling them stupid and you're mad, and but they keep they keep their archives in a box somewhere, and the children think it's stupid and they want to throw it out, and when the old man dies, and all this kind of thing,
Right.
But they're but they're there, and we can collect them, and things like the Indo-Caribbean Museum, for example,
Yes.
right? It's collecting these artifacts. I was just talking to the curator there this weekend. He was talking about a sarangi he got from somebody because he didn't know what to do with it, so he just gave it to the museum. And so people kind of are thinking that they see some old things that the grandparents might have or their parents might have, and they don't know what to do with it, where to keep it.
Right.
But you could give it to the museum. So if we start to have more and more things like that, and then we have a movement of people who are interested, because you see, to know our past grounds us properly, right? When we deal with, because we have to engage the world, especially with us being a small country. We have to engage the world. We have to engage Americans and British people and Indians and Chinese, and Chinese more and more these days. And when you don't have a sense of your place in the world, you will have this inferiority complex.
You will.
And in any sort of power dynamic, where one person wants to have power over you, and every dynamic has that power element. If they see some inferiority, that can be exploited, and you get a raw deal. right? Because you feel, lesser, you will, get tricked in that sort of way.
Right.
And all these things happen in, economic negotiations, political negotiations, and other types of things too.
Earlier on you mentioned CLR James and V.S. Naipaul, and I mentioned too that you highlight him in some of your books. Any intentions of writing or bringing back some aspects of that writing? Do you have any intentions, seeing that you write?
Yeah, well, actually, I did have sort of intentions at a certain point, but maybe it is something that should be done. But a lot of people have been writing about CLR James around the world, and I think Patrick French's biography of Naipaul is just incredible. And I mean, I was lucky, to be in conversation with Patrick while he was writing the book as well. So, yeah, I may have something more to add here and there, and then also I guess the audience. So perhaps, but I did, when I was in discussion with Ken Julian for the founding of the UTT Academy of Arts and Sciences, I wanted it to be named the James Naipaul Center, but he didn't want that. But I definitely think, CLR James and V.S. Naipaul, I mean, these are great world intellectuals, respected the world over. These are, just amazing minds that we produce. That's just, like, I could go back over the material again and again and again.
But, I mean, you're an academic writer.
Yeah.
Do you think you would ever be a West Indian writer?
You mean in terms of fiction?
Fiction. Has it ever crossed your mind?
Yes, it has. I mean, I like writing. I like creative writing, and I've done a few things like that, I have a great appreciation for the art of writing, because Trinidad is not a reading place. I mean, I remember Lloyd. People always used to ask Lloyd Best about that, right? And they asked Lloyd, why he never wrote a book. He never wrote a book in his life. And he said, well, you know what? People in Trinidad don't read. They read newspapers, so I write in the newspaper.
Right.
So he would write in the newspaper. He said, they read newspapers, so I write in the newspaper. So in that sense, I mean, if I were to write a book, I know that my audience would have to be foreign, largely. And then that changes the nature of what you write. And this is one thing about West Indian literature that I have a bit of an issue with. They are definitely writing for a foreign audience.
Yeah.
They are not writing for Trinis or Jamaicans or whatever. But you can't blame them for it. You can't blame the writers for that either, because we're not buying the books here.
Because we're few.
Yeah, exactly.
Far and
so
few.
they have to. So if you want to sell 1 million copies of a book, you cannot be writing for the West Indies, right? So I mean, so you're going to have to speak to the American audience and to the British audience, and then they are so ill-informed about the West Indies, so you have to deal with all these kind of issues. But this is one great thing about Naipaul as a writer. He always said he would never ever cave in to the sort of stereotypes. So even like something like Miguel Street, he never bothered to explain anything, to a British. He just wrote it in its pure form, and you have to come to it. And see, this is one of the things about great art, though. I guess it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but like Bob Marley, right? Another, not he's from Jamaica, but another great artist. Now he would be singing about Kingston 12 and Trenchtown and eating cornmeal porridge, and most people have no idea what those things mean, right? Like they don't know Kingston is divided up into districts. You have Kingston 12, Kingston 8, Kingston 16, and the number right? If you're from Kingston 8 or if you're from Kingston 12, that tells you where you're from. If you're upper class or lower class, because it's very, but he doesn't care. He's not explaining that to you. You have to come to Jamaica and find out, or that's your loss. But the world loves it,
yes.
because he's coming from a true place. And I guess in that sense, you never have to, once you are finding truth, you don't have to cater to a market. Truth is truth.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Meighoo, once more for being here.